every crime is a wound on the world. We're here to dissect it, layer by layer, to find the truth buried within. This is Anatomy of Crime. The ocean is the ultimate void. It is a place of infinite pressure, eternal darkness, and absolute silence. For centuries, the sea has swallowed ships, secrets, and people, offering no explanations to those left waiting on the shore. But what happens when the isolation of the deep is intentionally weaponized? What happens when a vessel designed for exploration becomes a sealed, submerged execution chamber? Today, we dissect the anatomy of a locked-room murder, unlike any other in modern history. We are examining a crime scene constructed of steel, submerged beneath the waves, controlled by a man who believed he was an untouchable god of his own underwater domain. We will explore how investigators breached this watery fortress, how forensic science decoded the secrets of the sea floor, and how a meticulous journalist became the victim of a narcissist who thought he had engineered the perfect crime. To understand the anatomy of this tragedy, we must first understand the two vastly different lives that collided on the evening of August 10, 2017 in Copenhagen, Denmark. The victim was Kim Wall. She was 30 years old, a Swedish freelance journalist whose work was defined by a fearless curiosity and a deep empathy for the marginalized. Kim was not a reporter who sat behind a desk rewriting press releases. She was an intrepid, boots-on-the-ground investigator. A graduate of the London School of Economics and Columbia University, she had traveled to some of the most dangerous and complex regions on Earth. She reported on the aftermath of the civil war in Sri Lanka, the underground economies of North Korea, and the lingering scars of radiation in the Marshall Islands. Her work appeared in the New York Times, Harper's, The Guardian, and Vice. She had a unique talent for finding the humanity in places the rest of the world had forgotten or deliberately ignored. Ironically, tragically, Kim Wall had survived assignments in active conflict zones and politically unstable regimes, only to face her demise in what is widely considered one of the safest regions on the planet, her native Scandinavia. On that August evening, she was not traveling to a war-torn capital. She was simply taking a short bicycle ride from a farewell party she was hosting with her boyfriend, Ole Staab. The couple was packing up their lives in Denmark, preparing to move to Beijing for a new chapter. But Kim had one lingering assignment. For months, she had been trying to secure an interview with a prominent, eccentric figure in the Danish aerospace and engineering community. She wanted to write a feature about him for Wired magazine. Just as her party was getting underway, she received a text message. It was the eccentric inventor, finally agreeing to the interview. He told her to meet him at the harbor that very evening. Ever the dedicated journalist, Kim excused herself from her own party, promising her friends and her partner that she would be back in a few hours. The man she was going to meet was Peter Madsen. In Denmark, he was a well-known, slightly polarizing minor celebrity, often referred to by the media as Rocket Madsen. He was a self-taught aerospace engineer and submarine builder. He was the kind of figure that the public finds endlessly fascinating, a modern-day Captain Nemo, operating outside the bounds of traditional academia or corporate funding. He had co-founded Copenhagen's Suborbitals, a crowd-funded space program with the audacious goal of launching a human into space on a homemade rocket. He had also built 3 privately funded submarines. The largest and most famous of these was the UC-3 Nautilus. At nearly 40 feet long and weighing 33 tons, it was one of the largest privately built submarines in the world. It was an impressive feat of amateur engineering, a dark gray steel leviathan that prowled the harbor of Copenhagen. However, behind the public persona of the quirky, brilliant tinkerer lay a much darker psychological anatomy. Those who had worked closely with Madsen described a man who was profoundly difficult, erratic, and driven by a toxic narcissism. He had a history of dramatic, acrimonious fallouts with his collaborators. He had been ousted from Copenhagen's suborbitals after clashing with the board over safety protocols and control. He demanded absolute obedience and reverence from those around him. When he did not receive it, he would fly into unpredictable rages. The submarine, the Nautilus, had become his primary domain. It was a space where he made the rules, where he was the unquestioned captain, and where he controlled the air, the pressure, and the depth. It was, in psychological terms, an extension of his own ego, an isolated kingdom where his authority was absolute. When Kim Wall arrived at the Reef Chalioen Island in Copenhagen harbor that evening, she boarded the Nautilus. A photograph taken by a bystander captures the moment perfectly and tragically. It shows Kim and Madsen standing in the conning tower of the submarine as it cuts through the calm waters, bathed in the golden light of the setting sun. Kim looks relaxed, a notebook likely in her pocket, ready to do the work she loved. Madsen is at the helm. It is the last known photograph of Kim Wall alive. The plan, as Kim understood it, was to sail out into the harbor for a couple of hours, conduct the interview, and return to port. But as the sun dipped below the horizon and the hours ticked by, the submarine did not return. Back at the apartment, Ole Staub was growing increasingly anxious. Midnight passed. He tried calling Kim's phone repeatedly, but the calls went straight to voicemail. Cell phone reception is non-existent when a submarine dives, but they were not supposed to be gone this long. By 1:30 in the morning on August 11th, panic set in. Ole contacted the Danish police to report his girlfriend missing. He explained that she had gone on an interview aboard the UC-3 Nautilus with Peter Madsen and had not returned. The police took the report seriously. A joint rescue operation was launched, involving helicopters, ships from the Danish Navy, and civilian vessels. The Baltic Sea is expansive, and locating a dark gray, stealthy vessel in the dead of night is an immense challenge. The breakthrough in the search came the following morning, August 11th, around 10:30 a.m. A lighthouse keeper at the Drogden Lighthouse spotted the Nautilus moving through the waters of the Koge Butt Bay, south of Copenhagen. A nearby private motorboat diverted its course to make contact. As they approached, the people on the boat saw Peter Madsen emerge from the submarine's hatch, dressed in his trademark camouflage military fatigues. But something was terribly wrong. The submarine was riding unusually low in the water. Suddenly, Madsen jumped into the sea, swimming toward the rescue boat. Behind him, the massive 33-ton UC-3 Nautilus slipped violently beneath the waves, sinking to the ocean floor in less than 30 seconds. Madsen was pulled from the water, safe and unharmed. When asked about his passenger, Kim Wall, Madsen appeared calm and offered his first narrative of events. He told the rescuers, and subsequently the police, a simple, seemingly plausible story. He claimed that the interview had concluded successfully the previous evening. He stated that he had steered the submarine back to the Reef Chalioen harbor area and dropped Kim Wall off near a restaurant at approximately 10:30 p.m. After dropping her off, he claimed he went back out to sea alone to do some testing. The next morning he experienced a catastrophic failure with a ballast tank, which caused the submarine to flood and sink rapidly. He barely escaped with his life. It was a story designed to neatly explain his survival, the loss of the vessel, and his lack of knowledge regarding Kim's current whereabouts. But investigators immediately found the anatomy of his story structurally unsound. The police began to dissect his timeline. They reviewed hours of CCTV footage from the area where Madsen claimed to have dropped Kim off. There was no sign of her. Her phone had not reconnected to any cellular network since she boarded the submarine. Her bank cards remained untouched. Furthermore, experienced submariners and naval engineers who viewed the footage of the sinking Nautilus found the sequence highly suspicious. Submarines are designed with multiple failsafes. For a vessel of that size to sink in 30 seconds required a massive instantaneous influx of water, something highly unlikely to occur from a simple mechanical malfunction. The police suspected the sinking was not an accident, but a deliberate act of sabotage intended to destroy a crime scene. Later that evening, on August 11th, Peter Madsen was arrested and charged with negligent manslaughter. The true forensic anatomy of this case began with an extraordinary feat of engineering and recovery. To prove a crime occurred, the Danish authorities needed the crime scene. They needed the submarine. On August 12th, salvage ships moved into position over the resting place of the Nautilus. Using massive cranes and steel cables, they painstakingly raised the 33-ton vessel from the seafloor. The submarine was drained of seawater and transported to a secure naval facility. When forensic technicians finally breached the hull, they were stepping into a uniquely challenging environment. The interior had been completely flooded, washed by thousands of gallons of cold Baltic Sea water. To the naked eye, the dark, cramped, rusted interior held no obvious secrets, but forensic science has tools designed to see the invisible. Technicians utilized luminol, a chemical agent that reacts with the iron in hemoglobin, emitting a blue glow even when blood has been diluted by massive amounts of water or cleaned with harsh chemicals. When the lights in the hangar were dimmed and the luminol was applied to the interior of the submarine, the horrific reality of what occurred inside the Nautilus was illuminated. The chemical reaction revealed traces of blood pooled in the bilge area, smeared on the walls, and soaking into the crevices of the steel decking. Simultaneously, a critical piece of evidence was recovered from Madsen himself. When he was arrested, police confiscated the camouflage suit he was wearing. Forensic analysis found microscopic traces of blood on the fabric, particularly around the groin area. DNA analysis quickly confirmed the blood in the submarine and the blood on Madsen's clothing belonged to Kim Wall. Confronted with undeniable physical evidence that Kim Wall had bled profusely inside his submarine, Madsen's initial story collapsed. He was forced to offer a second narrative during a custody hearing. This time, he admitted that Kim Wall had died aboard the Nautilus, but he maintained it was a tragic accident. He claimed that he was holding the heavy steel hatch of the submarine open for her as she climbed the ladder. He said he slipped, lost his grip, and the 70-kilogram hatch slammed shut, striking Kim directly on the head. He described a gruesome scene, claiming she suffered a massive fatal skull fracture and died instantly. Madsen told the court he was paralyzed by panic. He felt he would not be believed. In his state of shock, he decided to give her what he called a traditional burial at sea, dropping her fully intact body overboard into the Cogue Butt Bay before scuttling the submarine in an attempt to commit suicide, a plan he claimed he abandoned at the last second. This second story sent investigators on a massive, complex search operation. They were no longer looking for a missing person. They were searching for a body in the vast, murky waters of the Baltic Sea. They deployed divers, sonar equipment, and helicopters. They studied currents and tidal patterns to determine where a body dropped in that specific area might drift. For days, the ocean yielded nothing. Then, on August 21st, 10 days after the submarine sank, a morbid discovery shifted the entire trajectory of the investigation. a passing cyclist riding along the southern coast of Amager Island spotted something washed up in the shallow reeds. It was human remains. Specifically, it was a female torso. The head, arms, and legs had been removed. DNA testing rapidly confirmed it was the torso of Kim Wall. The forensic autopsy of the torso dismantled Madsen's claim of an intact sea burial, but it also revealed terrifying details that pointed heavily toward premeditation and sadistic violence. The medical examiner found that the limbs and head had not been removed by the tearing action of ship propellers or marine scavengers. They had been deliberately severed using a saw. Furthermore, the torso had been subjected to severe mutilation. The examiner documented 15 distinct stab wounds. The placement of these wounds was chillingly deliberate. Many of them were clustered around the groin and reproductive organs. Crucially, several deep puncture wounds had been inflicted shortly after death. The forensic pathologists explained the grim physics behind this. As a decomposing body creates gases, it becomes buoyant and floats to the surface. The killer had punctured the lungs and the abdominal cavity to release these gases, ensuring the torso would remain hidden on the sea floor. To guarantee this, the torso had been weighted down with metal pipes fastened securely with straps. This was not the work of a panicked man trying to hide an accident. This was methodical, calculated, and deeply disturbing. However, to definitively disprove Madsen's story of the falling hatch, investigators needed to find Kim Wall's head. The search of the ocean floor intensified. The Danish police enlisted the help of Swedish authorities, who possessed specialized water search dogs. These incredibly highly trained animals are capable of detecting the faint chemical signatures of human decomposition, specifically putrescine and cadaverine, as they rise from the depths and break the surface tension of the water. The dogs were taken out on small boats, charting grids across the bay. When a dog alerted to a scent by barking or pawing at the water, divers were sent down to that exact GPS coordinate. In early October, nearly 2 months after the murder, the dog's alerts led divers to a breakthrough. On the dark, muddy bottom of the sea, they found a series of plastic bags weighted down with heavy metal car parts. Inside these bags, investigators found Kim Wall's missing clothing, a knife, and her severed legs. Finally, they recovered a bag containing her head. The recovery of the head was the critical piece of the forensic puzzle. When the medical examiner analyzed the skull, the findings were conclusive. There were no fractures. There was no blunt force trauma of any kind. The heavy steel hatch had never struck her. Peter Madsen's second story was completely fabricated. The physical evidence proved he was lying about how she died, but establishing the exact cause of death was immensely difficult due to the length of time the remains had been submerged in the ocean. Backed into a corner by the forensic evidence, Madsen changed his story for a third time. In October, he offered a new explanation for her death. He claimed that he had gone up to the deck of the submarine, leaving Kim Wall alone in the hull below. Suddenly, a malfunction in the exhaust system caused toxic carbon monoxide gas to flood the sealed cabin. He claimed the pressure differences prevented him from opening the hatch to save her, and he was forced to watch helplessly through a small window as she suffocated. He finally admitted to dismembering her body, claiming he did so because it was the only way to physically remove her remains through the narrow hatches of the submarine, so he could bury her at sea. He continued to deny murder and sexual assault. The anatomy of this third lie was quickly dissected by mechanical engineers and medical examiners. Submarine experts examined the Nautilus's exhaust systems and found no evidence of a malfunction that could rapidly flood the cabin with fatal levels of carbon monoxide. More importantly, the medical examiner found no soot or traces of exhaust gases in Kim Wall's lung tissue or airways. The carbon monoxide story was just another desperate fabrication from a man trying to talk his way out of a sealed room of his own making. The authorities knew he had murdered her, but without a definitive cause of death, they needed to establish motive and intent to secure a conviction for premeditated murder. They needed to understand the anatomy of his mind. The investigation shifted from the physical crime scene to the digital one. Police executed search warrants on Madsen's laboratory and his personal living quarters. They seized computers, external hard drives, and mobile devices. What digital forensic investigators found on a hard drive in his workshop provided the horrific missing link. The drive contained a vast collection of deeply disturbing material. It held violent pornography, animated child exploitation material, and real, unsimulated snuff films showing women being tortured, impaled, and decapitated. The timestamps on his internet searches showed an escalating obsession with violence, suffocation, and extreme sexual sadism in the days and weeks leading up to the murder. He had specifically searched for videos of women having their throats slit. This digital footprint completely shattered the image of the quirky, harmless inventor. It revealed a deeply disturbed psychopathic narcissist whose violent fantasies had been brewing for a long time. The prosecution argued that Madsen had not suddenly snapped in a moment of panic. They built a case of cold, terrifying premeditation. They discovered that on the afternoon of August 10th, just hours before Kim Wall boarded the submarine, Madsen had brought a specific set of items on board. He had loaded a saw, sharpened screwdrivers, nylon straps, and extra heavy metal pipes. None of these items were required for a simple 2-hour cruise in the harbor. They were the tools of a premeditated murder and a planned disposal. The submarine was not just a vehicle. It was an isolation chamber he had prepared specifically for his dark fantasies. The trial of Peter Madsen began in April 2018 at the Copenhagen City Court. The prosecution, led by Jakob Buch-Jepsen, presented a methodical, devastating case. They walked the judges through the shifting lies, the forensic evidence recovered from the sea floor, and the horrifying contents of Madsen's hard drive. They presented psychiatric evaluations, diagnosing Madsen with severe psychopathic traits, pathological narcissism, and a severe lack of empathy. The prosecution argued that Madsen had lured Kim Wall onto the submarine with the promise of an interview, bound her, sexually assaulted her using the sharpened screwdrivers, murdered her by strangulation or throat cutting, and then methodically dismembered her to hide the evidence. Madsen's defense lawyer, Bettina Hald-Engmark, faced an impossible task. She argued that the prosecution's case was circumstantial regarding the actual cause of death, leaning heavily on Madsen's final story of the carbon monoxide poisoning. She argued that the dismemberment, while grotesque and illegal, did not prove murder. However, it was Madsen's own demeanor during the trial that perhaps did the most damage to his defense. Observers noted that he appeared arrogant, frequently smirking and rolling his eyes during the gruesome testimony. He treated the proceedings like a debate club exercise, arguing technical minutiae regarding the submarine's engineering, while demonstrating a chilling detachment from the reality of the human life he had extinguished. He showed absolutely no remorse. On April 25, 2018, the verdict was delivered. The judges found Peter Madsen's explanations completely untrustworthy and fabricated. They found him guilty on all charges, including premeditated murder, aggravated sexual assault, and the desecration of a corpse. In Denmark, a life sentence is rarely handed down, but the court deemed Madsen's crimes so exceptionally brutal, and his risk to society so high, that they sentenced him to life imprisonment. The ruling was a decisive victory for the prosecution, and a validation of the painstaking, massive investigative effort mounted by the Danish and Swedish authorities. They had successfully prosecuted a murder where the killer had attempted to use the ocean itself as an accomplice. The murder of Kim Wall was a tragedy that resonated globally. It highlighted the vulnerability of freelance journalists, who often operate without the safety net of large media organizations, walking into unknown situations, armed only with a notebook and a desire for the truth. In the wake of her death, her family and friends established the Kim Wall Memorial Fund, providing grants to young female reporters covering subcultures, the environment, and the stories that Kim would have loved to tell. Her legacy is one of bringing light to dark corners of the world, a stark contrast to the man who took her life. This case forces us to examine the anatomy of a locked-room mystery where the room is a steel tube submerged beneath the sea. Peter Madsen believed that his engineering prowess and the vastness of the Baltic Sea would guarantee his impunity. He believed he controlled all the variables in his underwater kingdom, but he failed to account for the relentless methodology of forensic science, the determination of investigators, and the simple truth that the ocean, despite its depth, eventually gives up its dead. The UC-3 Nautilus was designed to explore the depths of the sea, but ultimately it only revealed the terrifying, fathomless depths of human depravity. This has been Anatomy of Crime, where the truth is never simple, but always worth seeking.